Why would a CEO who runs over 300 stores decide to stand in line and apply for a job at his own company's warehouse under a fake name? With worn-out shoes and a brick phone, Parker Miles used to believe he was a good leader. He built Omega Wear, a fast fashion empire with trendy, affordable clothing from a tiny shop with just 4 employees. For over a decade, the company had expanded non-stop. Profits steadily rose, and internal reports read like a smooth jazz composition, consistent, upbeat, and polished. But then came the anonymous surveys that started to steal his sleep. No one listens. We're not respected. We work like robots. One small mistake, and you're treated like a criminal. Try giving an idea just once, and they cut your hours or shift you. Parker read them again and again. Maybe it was just a few disgruntled individuals. Or was there something worse? Something the Excel spreadsheets would never reveal. So he did something radical. He took off the suit, left the 23rd floor with its glass conference room and 15-function coffee machine, and became Paul, a temp worker at Omega Wear's largest warehouse in Grandville. No bodyguards, no privileges, no one knew who he was. Instead, a frayed uniform, heavy boots, breath that smelled like packing tape, and a crumpled ID badge hanging from his neck. And on his very first morning, Parker discovered something he hadn't faced in over 10 years. When you hold no title, people speak to you with the truth. No more flattery, no more polished presentation slides. Here, he was just Paul, the new guy hauling boxes, unable to tell a blouse from a cardigan, constantly inputting the wrong codes and earning scornful glares from the warehouse manager. It only took a few hours under the flickering fluorescent lights of the Granville warehouse for Parker to realize the fashion empire he thought he was leading wasn't as glamorous as its magazine covers. It was rotting from the inside, silent, fearful, and exhausted. And the worst part wasn't the broken scanners or flawed processes. It was the way people looked at one another like machines about to burn out. He had never felt so small. Yet it was in that very place where the air reeked of sweat and duct tape that Parker met people life had nearly forgotten. A young woman who still forced a smile, even though her back pain kept her from sleeping at night. A man who had spent 15 years sealing boxes, but had never once been asked, "Do you have any ideas?" And a warehouse manager who ruled the entire system through fear was hiding a horrifying secret that, if exposed, could bring down everything the company claimed to stand for. What started as a 2-week undercover operation turned into a journey that redefined what it means to be human, to be just, and to remember why a company exists in the first place. And what changed Parker Miles wasn't a scandal, wasn't a lawsuit. It was a whisper during a lunch break from a nameless warehouse worker that stopped his heart cold. Parker Miles sat alone in the conference room, the cold white LED lights glaring off the glass table, making him feel as if he were under interrogation. In front of him lay the quarterly report full of upward-sloping chart sales, repurchase rates, customer satisfaction. Everything looked fine, but beside it was a stack of printed anonymous employee feedback. Not the usual complaints, but cries for help. Sometimes I wish someone would just ask, "Are you okay?" We know the system is broken, but we're too afraid to say anything. If my paycheck can't support my family, what's left to be loyal to Parker slowly folded the papers. He wasn't reading anymore, he was listening, because for the first time, those words weren't just data, they were the sound of midnight sighs between shifts. The silent nods of resignation in a damp, freezing warehouse. The feeling of being invisible even while holding up an empire. He remembered last week's executive meeting, when he proposed a new survey to reassess conditions for warehouse staff. One vice president had scoffed. "They're still getting paid." Parker. If it was serious, we'd know. No. We don't know because no one ever steps off the 23rd floor to ask. And so, on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, Parker did something no retail CEO had ever dared to do. He erased himself from the system. He handed off daily operations to his assistant and sent a single email to the board of directors with the subject line, "Stepping away to listen more closely." In his private apartment, he opened an old suitcase. Carefully, he pulled out a faded t-shirt, a pair of worn jeans, and the scuffed shoes he'd worn in college. He stared at himself in the mirror, not as the man who led over 9,000 employees, but as Paul Mason, a 48-year-old man recently hired as a temp through a staffing agency. He switched to a brick phone, deleted all calendar appointments. The luxury watch was replaced with a cheap black plastic one. He logged off every social media account, wiped his digital footprint for 48 hours, just for one purpose: to live like someone with no power. On his first day at the Granville warehouse, he stood in line at the intake desk with 4 other young applicants. An older man in front of him struggled to tuck in his shirt while behind him. A frail girl coughed continuously. No one recognized him as Parker Miles. No one greeted him. No one smiled. And for the first time in over a decade, he felt invisible. When the warehouse manager, a middle-aged woman named Ramona Greaves, appeared, she didn't even look at him. She glanced at the list, then tossed him a name tag and a roll of packing tape. "Paul, right afternoon shift. Start at pallet zone 4. And don't ask questions." Parker nodded and walked toward the warehouse, the dim lighting and rumbling machinery forming a heavy rhythm that made him shiver. Inside that warehouse, there was no fashion brand, no radiant models in glossy ads, only dusty cardboard boxes, peeling labels, and tired hands. A young worker named Miguel leaned in close and whispered, "Work fast, work quiet, and don't ever mess up when Ramona's around." Parker nodded silently, but inside, a question began to echo louder and clearer than ever. What's happening in this place that the entire leadership either doesn't know or doesn't want to know? And from the darkest part of the system, the journey to uncover the truth began. Parker stepped into pallet zone 4 with deliberate slowness, trying to maintain just enough cluelessness not to raise suspicion. He, or rather, Paul, was assigned to reorganize leftover inventory in preparation for the upcoming shipment cycle. It sounded simple, but within the first 10 minutes, he realized this was a test of endurance. The raw concrete floor seeped through the soles of his boots. making every step heavier. The air was thick with the scent of damp cardboard, aged fabric, and sweat. Cartons stacked higher than his head created unstable walls, ready to collapse with one careless move. Ramona Greaves, the afternoon shift supervisor, never came close to inspect. She stood off in the distance, arms folded, more like a worn-out commander used to barking orders than doing any of the work herself. A group of workers moved silently, like gears in a machine. No conversation, no greetings. A faint tune played from a small Bluetooth speaker in the corner, an old-school track just beginning to lift the gloom, when Ramona snapped, "Turn that off. This is a workplace, not a nightclub." Parker shuddered. Every step in the warehouse was a small collision, the thud of falling boxes, the screech of pallets dragging across the floor, the sharp exhales of workers lifting heavy loads. No one complained. But everyone's eyes were bloodshot, not from emotion, but from dust, and from being too used to the fact that no one cared how they felt. Around noon, Parker noticed a small, frail-looking girl struggling to push a fully loaded cart of jeans, the thickest and heaviest kind. Her face was pale, hands trembling, sweat dotting her forehead. When one of the wheels got stuck in a floor groove, the cart tipped slightly and she stumbled forward, but she quickly tried to pull herself up. Before Parker could reach her, Ramona shouted from across the room, "Chloe, what is this? A fashion shoot? Move it. No one's paying you to stare at the floor." Chloe bowed her head, nodded quietly, and kept pushing the cart. Parker froze. Throughout his career, he had witnessed all kinds of managers hot-headed, obsessive, even cold and detached. But what he saw now was something different, intentional indifference. A practiced numbness, where employees were treated as tools rather than people. A few hours later, he was reassigned to the returns section, where thousands of items from regional stores came back for reprocessing. Piles of goods reached knee height, each needing to be scanned before being restocked. The scanners were glitchy, the Wi-Fi was weak, and the instructions, no one had time to give them. Parker held the scanner awkwardly, fumbling so much that another employee finally said, "You new here, keep the scanner close to the code, and don't let Ramona see you working slow. She doesn't need a reason to yell." A sharp guilt pierced Parker's chest. He had signed off on reports declaring the returns area one of the most efficient zones in the company. But in that very place, even with all his knowledge and authority, he was struggling like a total novice. By mid-afternoon, he heard a soft groan from behind a shelving unit. It was Chloe. She was sitting on the floor, clutching her lower back. Not crying, not speaking, just breathing hard, trying to stay conscious. No one came over. Parker knelt down and handed her the only bottle of water he had. She took it, nodded slightly in thanks, and stood back up to resume her work as if she had never been in pain. That's when it hit him. This wasn't laziness. This wasn't a lack of work ethic. This was an environment that made people forget they deserved to be cared for. And when you forget that for too long, you begin to think, maybe I don't deserve to be cared for at all. Parker gently clenched his fist. That night, he didn't go home right away. He stayed in his car, parked in the employee lot, sitting in the dark for hours, And for the first time in years, he felt ashamed. Not because sales had dropped, not because there was a supply chain failure, but because he, the founder of Omegaware, had allowed the very heart of his company to rot without even realizing it. Monday morning began with a crackling announcement over the warehouse speaker. Pallet zones 2 through 5 must be cleared by 10 a.m. If you can't keep up, don't expect sympathy. Parker, or Paul, stretched his sore back after a night of aching limbs. His body wasn't yet used to the repetitive lifting and pushing, but his mind had begun to awaken. Every step back into the warehouse wasn't just to observe anymore. It was to truly feel every breath, every silent glance. Chloe was at the front of pallet zone 4, where new shipments of jeans had just been unloaded from a container truck. The pallet in front of her held the heaviest merchandise, the kind that normally required at least 2 people to move. But this morning, she was doing it alone. Her face was pale, movements slow, her back hunched slightly as if cradling a hidden pain. Her hand searched along the box for a grip. One glove was torn, revealing old scrapes along her fingers. Parker quickly moved toward her, just as Chloe began pulling a box off the pallet. She braced herself, teeth clenched, but after lifting it only a few inches, she lost balance and collapsed forward onto the floor. Thud. The whole warehouse flinched. A few people glanced up, then looked back down and kept working. No one ran over. Not a single voice asked if she was okay. From across the room, Ramona narrowed her eyes in irritation. Chloe, you weren't born to act in dramas. Get up and keep moving. Parker could no longer stay composed. He rushed over and reached for Chloe's arm. She was trying to get up without making a sound. Her hands trembled, but her eyes were holding back tears. Not from pain, but from shame. He helped her sit on a nearby wooden crate. Pulling a small water bottle from his pocket, he said softly, "You need a break." Chloe shook her head. "I'm not allowed to. I clocked in late this morning. Second time this month. Ramona's watching me." Parker looked her straight in the eye. He no longer saw a worker breaking protocol. He saw a human being at the final edge of endurance. "I can help. You just have to say, 'I'm not okay.'" Chloe let out a laugh. Not joyful, not bitter, just tired. "I said that already. 4 months ago." The answer was, "No one here is okay. Chloe, you're not special." Parker said nothing. His chest tightened. How could a workplace make a young person believe that asking for care was selfish? After a few minutes, Chloe stood up. She gave an awkward nod and returned to her pallet. But before she walked away, she turned back and quietly said, "Thank you, Paul." Just those 2 words. Thank you. Paul choked him up. In his entire CEO career, he had been thanked by thousands of partners, senior staff, media, even television. But no one had ever thanked him, just for sitting down beside someone who was hurting. That night, Parker didn't write any work emails. He didn't read any reports. He just opened his phone and typed a single line into his notes app. Day 2. Chloe didn't cry, but I did, and he knew. From that moment on, his investigation was no longer about the company, or brand image, or KPIs. It had become a journey to rediscover the true meaning of leadership, knowing when to kneel down, to truly see the people the system had forgotten. On Tuesday afternoon, a storm hit the Granville warehouse, not wind or rain, but a flood of returns pouring in from all the satellite stores at once, creating a massive wave of incoming goods. The return processing section, already tight on space, was now 3 times as crowded. Boxes spilled everywhere, scanners lagged, the conveyor belt jammed under the weight. Ramona Greaves appeared right on cue and shouted like a fire alarm. "Everyone, we're falling behind. If this isn't done by 5 p.m., forget about getting any overtime this week." The words triggered an invisible race, heads down, eyes darting, hands flying. Parker was pushed into the customer intake zone, a position he clearly hadn't been trained for. But no one cared. "Paul, Station 3. Take this scanner. Just scan fast." "No questions," a co-worker yelled, shoving a flickering red light device into his hand. He stood behind the counter, face to face with a long line of people, all tired, irritated, and carrying bags full of returns. A middle-aged woman, her eyes bloodshot with fury, slammed a pile of crumpled dress shirts onto the counter and snapped, "I called," 3 times. No one answered. "I want my refund right now," Parker stammered. Yes, I'll check. Check the item code." His hands trembled slightly as he picked up each shirt. The scanner refused to recognize the barcodes. He fumbled, palms sweating. The woman's glare sliced across his face like a blade. "What the hell is wrong with you people? These are shirts from Omega Wear." "You don't see the logo," Parker almost blurted out. "Ma'am, I'm the..." But he caught himself just in time. "No, not yet." Steadying himself, he flipped the shirt's label over and scanned the batch code, an old managerial habit still etched in his mind. The faintly printed serial number wasn't part of the Omega Wear system. It was a similar design from another brand, with a different stitch pattern along the cuffs. He took a deep breath. "Ma'am, this item isn't part of our product line. I'm sorry, but we can't process a refund for this particular product." The woman glared at him. "Are you calling me a liar?" "No, ma'am. I'm just stating the facts based on the product code," he replied, calm but firm. She stormed off, muttering something about exposing this whole useless place online. Parker nearly collapsed onto the stool behind the counter as the next person in line stepped forward. His heart pounded, his hands still trembled. A few co-workers looked at him with surprise. From across the floor, Chloe glanced over and gave him a small nod as if to say, "You did good." But to Parker, it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a miniature replica of what the system dumped on frontline workers every single day. No real authority, no proper training, yet always expected to satisfy angry customers and always blamed when things went wrong. After his shift, he sank onto the bench in the break area behind the warehouse. A worker named James handed him a dented soda can and chuckled. "No one tells you this up front, but if you didn't quit today, you'll probably survive here." Parker laughed, but it was the laugh of someone who knew they had just survived a storm. When he got home, he sat silently in the kitchen, a place he usually only used for quick morning coffee. He opened his laptop and logged back into the operations system for the first time in 3 days of silence. But it wasn't to check revenue, it wasn't to reply to emails. It was to pull every single piece of customer feedback data related to the return system. And he found something. 84% of negative complaints came from stores classified under priority fast processing. Yet those same stores lacked clear instructions for return staff. Parker shut the laptop, leaned back, and let out a long sigh. The system wasn't broken. The system had never been designed to listen. And people like Chloe, James, even the angry woman from the return counter, were all trapped in a repeating cycle of disappointment. Thursday, inventory audit day. Parker was assigned to assist in the stock check area, where old and new shipments were verified before being logged into the system. He used to believe this process was one of the most efficient, almost the operational pride of Omegaware, where precision was upheld like a brand manifesto. But within just an hour, he realized that pride was an illusion. There were no clear instructions when the team began the count. Workers split up, using scanners with worn-down buttons, checking items one by one. The scanners glitched. The network was weak. The software lagged. Yet no one stopped. No one reported the problems. Parker saw a young man named Ryan calmly entering estimated quantities into the system without even verifying. He walked over and quietly asked, "Is the scanner broken?" Ryan shrugged without looking up. "Always is. But if you report it, they just say you don't know how to adapt." Parker paused, stunned. But what if the numbers are wrong? Ryan let out a dry chuckle. "No one checks, as long as the data looks right. But if you enter the right numbers and you're slow, say goodbye to next week's hours." That sentence hit Parker like a slap. He who once gave keynote speeches at industry conferences about how accuracy is the backbone of supply chains was now witnessing his own system run on pretense. Chloe walked by, arms full of pre-printed inventory forms. She winced slightly as she laid them on the table and fired up her scanner. But after just a few minutes, she stopped, staring at the device with tired frustration. The error light blinked red. Parker stepped closer. "Let me try." He checked. The scanner really was broken, unable to connect to the internal network. Chloe glanced around, no supervisors in sight, then exhaled sharply. "I'll write it down for now. Every time someone reports a broken scanner, we get scolded for not being flexible. They want the numbers done before submission. If you're slow, you're the first to pay." Parker spoke softly. "But what if you input the wrong numbers?" Chloe cut him off. This time, her eyes weren't timid anymore. "You get yelled at for doing it right and being slow. You do it wrong, you're left alone. As long as it looks okay, you've seen it. No one gets praised for being accurate." She wasn't angry. She didn't cry. But in her voice was a cold resignation, something that shouldn't exist in any company unless its culture had already decayed. Parker stared at the scanner's screen numbers flickering up and down without logic. Each item treated like a meaningless code, no one truly caring whether it was actually in stock or not. No one asked, what happens if this data leads to the wrong restock? If phantom inventory causes a store to run out of real items? If a customer can't find what they need because someone just guessed a number to get it over with? He already knew the answer. Disappointment begins with the small things. Parker left the inventory area early that day. He went to the break room, poured a cup of water from the old, creaky filter machine, and sat at the table. In the small notebook he carried, he wrote a bold line: "A culture of fear creates people who pretend. People who pretend create fake data. Fake data will kill a company in silence." On the wall, there was an old slogan taped up, one corner peeling away: "Accuracy is our top priority." Parker stood up and quietly took the sign down. He couldn't bear to look at it another second. Friday afternoon. Granville was bathed in golden-orange sunlight, starkly contrasting with the stifling atmosphere inside the warehouse. After a 6-hour unloading shift with no break, Parker sat silently in the rear brake area, holding a cup of weak coffee brewed from the wheezing old machine that sputtered every time it poured water. The seat across from him wasn't empty. An older man with a solid frame and kind face, though his eyes bore the weight of time, sat down. He placed a crumpled sandwich wrapped in a brown paper bag on the table, then offered Parker a faint smile. "A rookie who makes it to day 6. That's impressive. You are." "David. Been here since before this warehouse was even a warehouse, back when it was still a parking lot. 15 years. David poured himself a bit of coffee, the pale brown kind, barely more than ash-scented water. But he drank it slowly, as if it were a familiar ritual. Parker looked at him. He wanted to ask, "Why have you stayed so long?" but he didn't. Because he knew sometimes endurance doesn't come from choice. It comes from having no other choice. David stared into the distance, then spoke softly, almost in a whisper. "I used to like this place. Actually, those first few years were good. There was laughter, small birthday parties in the break room. Managers used to ask, 'How's the new shelving system? Is it working for you?' Now, it's just KPI charts taped to the wall and shouting." Parker said nothing. David continued, his voice calm and even. "I have a wife, 2 kids. My wife had thyroid surgery a few months ago. Almost drained our whole account. I tried to access the employee insurance package, but that system's a maze. Broken forms, blank screens. Called the hotline. They said, 'Please wait for HR to respond.' 3 weeks, no reply. 'So, how did you manage?' Parker asked. David shrugged. "Borrowed from my sister. Felt like hell, but better than letting my wife stay in pain. Last month, almost lost our apartment, couldn't pay rent on time. I had to pick up night shifts, worked weekends too." Parker lowered his gaze, each of David's words cutting like a quiet blade. David smiled, not a joyful smile, but the weary smile of someone who'd grown used to injustice. "You know what the most exhausting part is? It's not the heavy lifting, not the yelling. It's the feeling. that you don't exist. 15 years, 3 different managers, not one ever asked, "Do you have any ideas on how to make this place better?" 15 years, not once. Parker wanted to leap up. He wanted to say, "I'm sorry. I'm the CEO. I'll fix this. All of it." But he couldn't, because right now, he wasn't the CEO. He was Paul David's co-worker on the same shift. And the greatest responsibility of someone who listens is to stay silent long enough to truly understand. David took one last sip of coffee, then stood up. "I'm heading out early today. My wife called." Her voice sounded weak. "I don't want to miss dinner tonight." He gently patted Parker on the shoulder. "You're new here, but you're quiet. I like that. Don't let this place swallow what's human in you." And then he left, leaving behind a hollow paper cup on the table and a vast, echoing silence inside Parker. That night, Parker reopened the internal benefit system his company was using. The network connection was fine, but to access any information, he had to click through 7 steps, download 3 separate PDFs, and submit a hard copy to the HR department. He tried calling the hotline, the line was busy. He submitted a form, the page went blank. He closed his eyes and let out a long, heavy breath. It wasn't just a broken system. It was an organization that had forgotten that workers are not costs, they are people. And every time they're turned away, the company impoverishes itself through neglect. Saturday afternoon, the Granville warehouse was quieter than usual. Shifts were shorter. Many workers left early. But Ramona Greaves, the shift manager, remained. She didn't have to speak much. Just one cold glance was enough to make everyone finish their weekend duties without protest. Parker, storing a scanner in the defective inventory room, walked past the operations office, a small room with frosted glass tucked away at the far end of the hallway. The light was on. The door was slightly ajar. He had meant to walk past. But then a sound made him stop. Ramona's voice, low, controlled, entirely different from her usual barking tone. "I told you, just mark it as damaged during transit. No one checks every unit. Ship it straight to the outlet. Like before, I'll take care of the rest." Parker froze, heart pounding. 1 beat, 2 beats. He stepped gently back toward the door, close enough to hear, but not be seen. That batch of blouses from last week, the limited run ones with the metallic trim at the neckline, the stitching's off, but they're totally sellable. No way I'm letting inventory control touch them. Move them to the Millbridge outlet. You know how to divide them. Parker felt a chill spread through his entire body. He knew that batch well. He had personally signed off on the trial production. It was a premium quality product, made with higher cost materials intended for flagship stores and marked as lightly defective with a special discounted price tag. Part of the batch had even been earmarked for donation to women's re-entry shelters. And now those very products were being funneled out of the system by Ramona, labeled as irreparably damaged, and quietly rerouted to the outlet where she had a secret deal in place to skim profits. This was no longer a procedural mistake, no longer a slip caused by pressure. This was fraud, intentional, systematic. Parker left the hallway in silence, his heart pounding violently in his chest. He walked briskly to the parking lot, revealing no sign of alarm. Inside his mind, the pieces began falling into place. Why inventory never matched? Why reports always came back within target? Why employees were so afraid to question, afraid to speak up? It all revolved around a central pillar of unchecked power headed by Ramona. And maybe she wasn't acting alone. That night, Parker didn't go home. He found a small cafe outside the Granville city center where the Wi-Fi was strong, and the lighting was dim enough to keep him unrecognized. He opened his personal laptop, logged into his senior executive monitoring account, the one access he had quietly retained throughout his undercover journey. Every shipment batch, every internal transfer log, every record linked to the Millbridge outlet appeared on screen. At least 5 batches over the last 3 months had no clear justification for their status changes. All were approved by Ramona. All occurred on days flagged as scanner errors during audits. There was no doubt anymore. Parker dropped his head into his hands, the weight of pain crashing over him, not just from the deception, but from the deeper betrayal of trust. He had once believed the system he built couldn't be abused, but he had been wrong. When an organization lacks a real feedback mechanism, silence becomes the perfect cover for wrongdoing. He drafted a secure, triple-encrypted email to the head of internal audit. The subject line contained just 5 words. Don't ask. Start investigating. Then he closed the laptop. Tomorrow morning, he would return, not as Paul, but as Parker Miles, CEO of OmegaWare. And this time, he wasn't coming to observe. He was coming to act. The next morning, Granville began like any other day, flickering white lights, scanners beeping non-stop, warehouse staff quietly squeezing between towering stacks of boxes. But that morning, someone walked in who didn't belong. Gone was the faded t-shirt. Gone were the worn shoes and the layers soaked in sweat. In their place stood a man in a sharp grey suit, eyes alert, stride firm and purposeful. That face, after a few stunned seconds, was recognized by more than one person. It was Parker Miles, the CEO of OmegaWare. Ramona had just stepped out of her office and froze, eyes wide. "You, what are you doing here?" she stammered. Her voice caught somewhere between shock and panic. Parker didn't answer her. He walked straight ahead past rows of stacked inventory toward the employee break room where the morning shift was gathering. The workers turned. Someone dropped their coffee cup. Someone whispered, "No way. Is that him, David?" Seated in the back corner, paused as Parker's gaze swept across the room and landed softly on him. Chloe, mid-shelving a box, tightened her grip and took a step back, as if the entire week's memories rushed in all at once. Parker stood in the center of the room. Silence. He unbuttoned his suit jacket, loosened his tie, removing a symbol more than an accessory, and looked them straight in the eyes. "I know you're confused, maybe angry, maybe uncertain, But the first thing I want to say is, I'm sorry. Not a sound. Parker swallowed hard. His voice dropped low. I'm Parker Miles, CEO of this company, and I have been working here the past 2 weeks under the name Paul. A ripple spread through the room like a wave. David squinted, stunned. Chloe raised her hand to her mouth. Ramona, now frozen in the doorway, turned pale. I've hauled boxes beside you. I've hit the floor when a pallet collapsed. I've been yelled at in front of customers. I've seen bad backs, broken scanners, and false reports, things we on the upper floor never see, never feel. He paused, turning his gaze toward Ramona. And I also heard the call yesterday about you, warehouse manager, funneling lightly defective merchandise out of the system and receiving illegal kickbacks from the Millbridge outlet. I know everything. Ramona opened her mouth to object, but Parker raised his hand firm and final. We've submitted all data to the internal investigations team. Authorities are now involved. You are hereby suspended, effective immediately. The room froze. Ramona took a step forward, but the internal security team, quietly stationed by Parker ahead of time, entered. She struggled, shouting, "This is all a misunderstanding. You have no idea what I've had to carry here," Parker replied, his voice low but sharp as steel. You carried fear, not responsibility, and OmegaWare will not be built on fear. Ramona was escorted out. The door closed behind her. No one said a word. Parker turned, his gaze meeting every person in the room. I didn't come here to teach you how to work. I came to learn. And I've learned the most important lesson of my life as a CEO. He looked toward Chloe. I saw a young woman work herself to exhaustion, too afraid to ask for a break, because she thought it would make her look weak. Then to David, I heard the story of a man who gave 15 years to this place and was never once asked, "Do you have any ideas to make it better?" His voice caught. I failed. Not because profits dipped, but because I believed that as long as the reports looked good, the company was fine. He paused, then nodded gently, as if sealing a vow. From today, everything will change. Not with slogans, not with internal newsletters, but with action, starting with me. Parker walked slowly toward the door. Before leaving, he turned back and said one final thing. Thank you for not giving up, even when the system almost gave up on you. Then he left the room, and behind him, there was no applause, only silence, the kind that comes when trust begins to quietly return. Just 2 hours after the reveal at the Granville warehouse, an urgent email was sent from Parker Miles's personal account with a simple subject line, "No more silence." That email reached every senior executive, branch manager, HR department, audit division, and internal communications team. It wasn't a vague apology. It was an ultimatum. OmegaWare was officially launching a full-scale internal investigation. Every logistics unit, retail branch, and warehouse would be audited. Every inventory report, return process, and benefit system put under the microscope. Within just 72 hours, the Special Audit Task Force personally appointed by Parker uncovered 6 major irregularities across various stores, falsified shipping documents, inflated stock reports, even intentionally manipulated shift scheduling designed to punish difficult employees. Parker immediately terminated 2 regional managers and suspended 3 supervisors accused of falsifying employee records. He didn't call it a purge, he called it a cleansing of responsibility. In a system-wide online meeting broadcast live to every branch, Parker sat with no podium, no fancy microphone, just a simple webcam and a steady, quiet voice. I don't need everyone to be perfect. I just need everyone to be human again. Then he announced a series of sweeping reforms that shook the retail industry. 1. A new benefits system. A simplified interface, one tap to access everything. Every employee is assigned an internal advocate to help navigate insurance or emergency assistance. Increased health coverage limits for long-term staff. 2. A two-way feedback mechanism. An upgraded anonymous reporting platform. Every submission must receive a response within 7 business days. Executive leadership is required to personally respond to at least 5 feedback entries per week. 3. Frontline Innovation Fund. Any idea from staff that improves efficiency, from how boxes are packed to how customers are greeted, can be submitted. If implemented, the employee receives a cash bonus and 1 week of paid leave. 4. Elimination of all shady intermediary outlets. All non-authorized outlets are permanently shut down. Lightly defective merchandise will be either publicly discounted or donated to verified, transparent, charitable organizations. Parker personally invited Chloe to lead the new warehouse operations improvement team. David, the man who had devoted 15 years of his life, was appointed regional internal advisor, tasked with monitoring and improving workplace conditions. Parker also set 1 personal mandate each quarter. He would work 2 full days at a random warehouse as a regular employee. No prior notice, no entourage. No one forced him to do it. But he knew trust isn't built by words, it's built by presence. When the Granville story broke, the retail media was stunned. What began as an internal scandal quickly transformed into a historic reform movement. A CEO who dared to drop to the bottom of his own system, who owned up to failure, and who acted not for PR, but for people. At a national enterprise conference, Parker ended his speech with just 1 sentence: "I built a system to sell clothes. But now, I want to build a company where people no longer feel invisible." No one stood up in thunderous applause, but some quietly shed tears, including Chloe, watching the live stream from the Granville warehouse, where she was now the new manager. 2 months after Parker Miles walked out of Granville, not as a CEO issuing orders, but as a leader who had truly listened, everything had changed. No, the company hadn't suddenly turned into paradise. There were still deadlines, still reports, still exhausting shifts and buggy systems not yet fully fixed. But now, people no longer stayed silent. At the Granville warehouse, The new shift schedule was printed in color and posted at the entrance alongside a sign that read, "If something's wrong, write it here. Someone will read it." The internal feedback board was no longer blank. Each week, Chloe, in her new role as manager, read and responded to every single note, even if it was just a scribbled complaint that said, "The water filter needs replacing." The break room was repainted. Not fancy, just simple. Welcoming. A whiteboard was added with one question written fresh each morning. "How are you feeling today? We want to know." David, now serving as internal advisor, spent every Tuesday afternoon brewing coffee and simply sitting. Anyone could come talk, or not, but everyone knew he was the kind of man who listened without judgment and who made sure voices reached the right place. Parker no longer wore disguises, but sometimes he still showed up unannounced, not to inspect, but to share lunch with frontline staff. He didn't say much, just asked one question. "Has anything recently made you feel respected?" Chloe once answered, "When I miscounted inventory, and instead of being yelled at, someone asked me, 'Do you need more guidance?'" James, the same worker who once joked that Parker was the rookie, was now an internal training coach. On his first day leading a session, he said, "This job isn't easy, but if someone sits with you when you're at your lowest, you won't quit." Internal stats after 60 days of reform. Employee turnover dropped by 48%. Suggestions for improvement tripled. SaaS. Employee satisfaction rose from 56% to 89%. And 7 frontline ideas were implemented company-wide, saving over $1.2 million per quarter. In a closed leadership meeting, Parker set an old cardboard box on the table, the very first box he'd carried as Paul. He didn't say a word at first, just opened the lid. Inside were simple things: a torn glove, a faulty scanner, a sweat-stained notebook, and one anonymous feedback slip that read, "We don't need a brilliant CEO. We need someone who won't forget who we are." He looked around the room and nodded. Reform isn't about rewriting a procedure. It's about rewriting how we see people. Omega Wear, once known for great prices, stylish clothes, was now being celebrated in the press with a new title, The Retail Company with a Human Heart. But for Parker Miles, the thing he was most proud of wasn't printed in any newspaper. It was on a quiet, windless afternoon at Granville when he happened to see Chloe sitting in a corner of the warehouse, smiling softly as she opened a birthday gift from the morning shift crew, a thermal mug engraved with the words, "Don't forget to rest." She no longer looked afraid, no longer trembled at the sight of the shift schedule, no longer lowered her head when saying, "I made a mistake." And that's when Parker knew the new culture had begun. Not from the top down, but from trust, spreading through the smallest of actions. That fall, Parker Miles returned to the Granville warehouse, the place where all the cracks had first appeared, and where hope had quietly begun to grow again. He didn't bring a performance report. There was no entourage. Just himself carrying a small bag of old keepsakes, the cloth cap he wore as Paul, a worn name tag, and the sweat-blurred notebook he once carried. The warehouse looked ordinary that day, but to him, every step on the concrete floor was a reminder Never lead unless you're willing to walk through the dark. He walked to a familiar corner where Chloe had once sat on the floor, clutching her aching back, where he had handed her that first bottle of water. Now, hanging neatly on that wall, was a wooden frame containing the first team photo of the Granville crew after the reforms. Beneath the photo was a hand-carved inscription: "We are not a small part of a big company. We are the heart, and hearts deserve to be heard." Parker stood there for a long time, saying nothing. A young employee passed by, recognized him, and respectfully bowed. "Good afternoon, Mr. Parker." Parker smiled. "How are you today?" A simple question, one he had forgotten to ask for years, because the most important things in a company aren't found in profit graphs, aren't printed in strategic brochures. They live in the eyes of people, in the sound of their breathing, in the sweat that goes unseen. Parker once believed that building an empire meant expansion, more stores, more revenue, more market share. But now, he understood real building means returning to the places you once overlooked, listening to the voices once deemed too small to matter, and showing with action that every person in this organization holds value. A company isn't strong because it has the most talented people. It's strong because no one is forced to hide their humanity just to survive. A week later, during a rare televised interview, Parker was asked, "What do you think changed your company the fastest?" He didn't mention new policies, updated procedures, or technology upgrades. He simply answered, "It was the moment I sat beside someone no one listened to and truly listened." We don't need greater CEOs. We need more people willing to step down and choose kindness, even if it's late. If you're in a position of leadership, leave your desk just once. Go to where the weakest person in your organization is struggling not to collapse. Listen not to control, but to understand. Not to fix, but to connect. And if you're a small voice in a big system, tired of being overlooked, please remember, you are not invisible, you are not alone, and you deserve to be seen for exactly who you are. Because in the end, a truly strong company isn't the one where everyone runs the fastest. It's the one where even the slowest is never left behind.